Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
On November 24th, a federal judge dismissed two separate criminal charges brought against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, after ruling that the prosecutor responsible for the charges, Lindsay Halligan, was appointed unlawfully. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reacted to the news during a press gaggle at the White House.
Lindsay Halligan was legally appointed, and that's the administration's position. I know there was a judge who is clearly trying to shield Letitia James and James Comey from receiving accountability, and that's why they took this unprecedented action to throw away the indictments against these two individuals. But the Department of Justice will be appealing very soon, and it is our position that Lindsay Halligan is extremely qualified for this position, but more importantly, was legally appointed to it.
Meanwhile, overseas, the Russia-Ukraine war could potentially come to a close sooner than expected after Ukrainian President Zelensky agreed to the core terms of the peace plan put forth by President Trump. But there are some differences here still being ironed out. Lots to discuss. Let's bring in our panel, like former State Department spokesperson Marie Harf, AEI resident fellow and former White House speechwriter Marc Thiessen, and Fox News Washington-based correspondent Mark Meredith. Marc Thiessen, let me start with you. The prospect of this actually working, this peace deal, we've heard just bits and pieces. There was a lot of uproar about the 28-point plan at the beginning, that maybe it was too favorable to Russia. Then there was efforts in Ukraine to kind of get to something they could agree to in Geneva. It seems like they may be close.
It does seem like they may be close. And look, that was the opening bid, which was laying out some of Russia's requests. It was negotiated differently, and now and I think the Ukrainians are actually very happy with how this is turning out. Look, the most important part of it, though, Bret, is the security guarantees, right? We're talking about an Article 5 commitment that the Trump administration is offering for Ukraine, and also we need to arm the Ukrainians, probably even more than if the war were continuing, because we don't want to have to ever deliver on that Article 5 commitment. We want the Ukrainians to be so strong militarily that Putin will never even think of restarting this war. And what Putin's gambit here is if he does agree to peace, is he just wants to pause this, right? He invaded under Obama, then he stopped under Trump, then he invaded under Biden, now he's talking about stopping under Trump. He's going to start again, unless we make it impossible for him to do so. And so that's the key to having a lasting peace, is making it impossible for him to wait out Donald Trump and resume his conquest of Ukraine.
Yeah, and Marie, the Article 5 Mark is referring to deals with NATO, but this would be Article 5 in principle only, not inside NATO. It would be a defense if Putin attacks again, we would come to their defense.
That's right. I mean, not being part of NATO is a significant difference. And that's been a core question around Ukraine since for a long time, actually, since before the war started. The other party that Mark didn't mention or focus in on as much is our partners in Europe, right? It's not just the Ukrainians, it's not just the Russians. I think for the past week or so, the Europeans have felt left out of this conversation that they felt like was mainly Russia and the US. I think in the last 24 to 48 hours, they're feeling a little bit better about the negotiations, a little bit better about what they've heard. But going forward, if we are going to have a unified front against Russia to, as Mark said, prevent them from ever reinvading, that needs to include Europe, and we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and Mark Meredith, it seems that the White House is expressing optimism cautiously, but they are expressing optimism.
Bret, you are, and it's the president himself has been the one that's been most vocal, even just today. We heard from him in the Rose Garden during the turkey pardoning ceremony, where he said that they are making tremendous progress. Of course, Trump speaks so often in these big words, in the sense that things are going to be great, and obviously he is very eager to see this war come to an end. And we've also seen Vice President Vance be just as vocal about this, saying that this has to end in order for the world to get back and to accomplish things together. The president, though, is also making it very clear he doesn't want Zelensky just zipping over to Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving weekend. In fact, he said he's not going to sit down with Zelensky or Putin at the moment, and instead he's dispatching senior aides. Steve Witkoff's going to go to Moscow. We know that the army secretary is going to deal with the Ukrainians, but there was talk as of 5 hours ago that maybe Zelensky was going to pop up in Washington or in Florida, and now that is no longer the case. And the president has said that he's making sure his entire team, from the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, down to Secretary Rubio, are fully involved in what's happening. And to Marie's other point, it is Europe that is another huge X factor in all of this, because all it takes is the Europeans telling Zelensky and his team, don't sign this. That completely could put everything up at a hold at this point.
But let's just think happy thoughts as we head towards Thanksgiving. and they do a deal prior to Turkey Day. And Marc Thiessen, if that happened, it would be a major feather in the president's cap.
Oh my gosh, it would be a major feather in his cap, even if it happened after Turkey Day. Anytime it would happen, it would be a major feather in his cap. I mean, if you think about the record that he's put together over the last year, this would be the final piece in probably the greatest peacemaking presidency in modern times. But there's a lot between here and there. Normally in these negotiations, what you do is you negotiate the stuff that's easy to agree on, and then it's the hard stuff at the end. And again, we have no indication that Vladimir Putin really intends to sign this. But if he doesn't sign it, and if the U.S. and Ukraine agree on a deal and then Putin says no, then he's the obstacle to peace. And Donald Trump will come down on him like a ton of bricks. We've already got incredibly tough sanctions. India has stopped buying Russian oil. China is suspending its Russian oil purchases. And if he were to sign that sanctions bill from Congress and also allow Tomahawks to take out Russian energy facilities and bombing bases and drone factories, Putin would be brought to his knees in pretty short order. So the pressure's really on Vladimir Putin.
It hasn't been, Marie. It hasn't been full court pressure on Vladimir Putin as of yet. There's been some, to Mark's point. India and China has pulled back a bit, but there are many more levers that could be pulled, and I assume that's part of this negotiation.
That's right. There are many more levers, and you see Congress from both sides of the aisle having real conversations about them playing a role in upping the ante here when it comes to Russia and Russian sanctions. There's a lot of appetite on both sides of the aisle to increase some of that pressure. But the question at the end of the day is there any pressure that's enough, absent battlefield losses, for Putin to say yes here? And he has staked so much of his leadership on this war that I am dubious that there's anything that would get him to say yes. But the destruction is so bad. They continue to bomb, far into Ukraine, in Kyiv, all across the country, that, kudos to the president's team for trying. I don't want to give too much away to Russia if we end up getting to a deal, but I want this war to end. And we'll see if some of those additional pressure levers come to bear if Putin does not say yes pretty soon as well.
Yeah, and last thing on this topic, Mark, the president seems committed to have his team, out and about and doing this. He, took an active role going to Alaska to meet with Putin. There was not a lot of there after that. In fact, Putin increased attacks. Then Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and increased attacks again. And so there maybe this is a different attempt by President Trump to do it differently.
Bret, I would think you're right, because obviously that if there were to be any sort of meeting again, the expectation would be now the peace has to happen. You've had the meetings with all of the principals. Are you going to get a deal done or not? And to what Maria and Mark were also speaking about, that this has continued to drag on a lot longer than maybe even the White House originally thought once they got a handle of what was happening with negotiations. For the Russians, I tend to agree with Marie here. You don't get the sense that they are just ready to knock this all out before the end of the holiday. Even Lavrov, their foreign minister, said earlier today that they were still waiting for more details from the Americans, but they were communicating. You almost have to wonder how much of this will just kind of be dragged along week by week. But I take your point, Bret. It is the holidays, so we'll be thankful if a war could come to an end sooner rather than later.
We'll be back in just a moment. we've seen these cases against Comey, Letitia James be challenged, dismissed by a federal judge. There's an appeal, Marc Thiessen, going on that the DOJ says they're going to do, defending Lindsay Halligan and her appointment as a U.S. attorney. And at the same time, you have this effort by the Department of War to go potentially after Arizona Senator Mark Kelly for being a part of this video where they say, do not follow illegal orders. Where do you think this all goes? And is this a benefit for the president and his base, or is this kind of on the line of what they should be doing?
So two things. One, I thought the video that the senators and congressmen put out was absolutely outrageous, because every officer is trained and knows that if they suspect that an order is illegal, they go to their JAG officer and ask, right? And you can't have a situation where you're encouraging troops to disobey orders and make individual judgments on every single thing that they're being asked. So it was really pushing for insubordination. That said, it's not sedition. It's in case of Kelly, because he's a retired officer, you could potentially, I mean, there is a path to punishing him potentially or court-martialing him. I just think that the president's original idea of the best revenge is success is the way to go on all these things. And I think if he had just come out and said, this is outrageous, and not gone the extra step of calling for the death penalty and trials and all the rest of it, 90% of America would have agreed with him. So I just think it's an overstep.
And Marie, Democrats and maybe Senator Kelly could be somehow emboldened by this effort, potentially, politically.
Right. I mean, Mark gives very good political advice. The problem is President Trump always goes 3 steps too far, right? He can't ever just play things straight. And I think that his outrageous response to this got people across the political spectrum really critical of him. I mean, look, there's a lot that's happened in these last, let's say, month that it feels like President Trump is really kind of back on his heels and he's lashing out a little bit. The huge Democratic victories in the elections, including in red parts of bluer purplish states earlier in November. One of his key allies turning on him, resigning from Congress. Other people talking about resigning. She's sort of the canary in the coal mine, right? These cases against Comey and Letitia James being dropped. So you have this context where the president, it seems like, feels really under attack right now and back on his heels. His numbers, even in our Fox News polls, really bad, Bret. So this is, I think, part of how you see Trump responding. And unfortunately, I think as he feels more under threat, you're going to see more of those kinds of responses from him.
And Mark Meredith, the White House manages oftentimes to pull a rabbit out of a hat politically. As you head into 26, obviously a lot depends on where the economy is, how people feel about the economy, and a lot will determine that. But there may be other big plays outside of these foreign policy big maneuvers that happen.
Bret, you're absolutely right. The economy is going to be the number 1, 2, and 3 issue in next November's midterms. We already know that both Republicans in the House and Democrats in the House are eager to make that the issue front and center. Republicans, of course, are going to face a lot of questions since they are both in power in the White House and in the legislative branch. Democrats certainly believe that they can say this isn't just us, as Trump was blaming us a year ago. Look at where prices are now. The president is, of course, putting his spin on things, looking at where prices are for Thanksgiving dinner this year compared to years past. But there's already been that war of messaging of, well, what does that really include and what does that mean? Bret, you're right. I mean, after Christmas, how are people feeling about the job market? We haven't really gotten good job numbers now in months, thanks to the government shutdown. We don't really know where things stand. There's this question about who the next Fed chair is going to be. Are we going to see a rate cut in December? All of these issues are going to compound as we get closer and closer to midterm primaries in the spring. And you want to bet that'll be the number 1 topic we hear from every lawmaker, despite what may be happening in Russia, Ukraine, or what's happening with James Comey and Letitia James.
100%. All right, panel, thanks. Now for a bit of history. On November 4th, 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter made one of the most astonishing discoveries in Egyptology. He uncovered a hidden stairway in the Valley of the Kings, leading to the long-lost tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun. After clearing rubble, Carter's team exposed a sealed door with a royal seal still intact, the sign that the tomb might be untouched. The tomb was filled with thousands of artifacts, including the famous gold death mask, providing unprecedented insight into ancient Egyptian burial practices. King Tut's mummy is on display in a climate-controlled case inside his tomb in Luxor, Egypt. However, many of his priceless artifacts, including the iconic golden mask, are on display at the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Marie, Mark, and Mark, I'm Bret Baier. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.